If you are someone who's recently been diagnosed with PCOS, or you've been living with PCOS for a while now, feeling overwhelmed, frustrated with all of the different advice out there, and maybe everything that you've been trying has not been making you feel better, and you feel trapped in your own body, then this episode is for you. Many women who have PCOS are given a prescription and the instruction to simply go on a low-carb diet and lose weight, whether or not they're in a larger body. And that fits right in with diet culture, right? But is dieting the answer to PCOS? Will losing weight really fix PCOS symptoms? And what if we aren't in a larger body? Is it possible to ditch diets and still manage your PCOS? That is what we are talking about on today's episode with our guest, Stepanie Hill. Stepanie is a registered dietitian and PCOS expert. And together we're going to talk about ways you can address your PCOS and support yourself in a non-diet way, the common myths surrounding PCOS and common mistakes made. We're going to talk about the truth behind low-carb diets and PCOS. Is weight loss really the cure for PCOS? Why cutting out carbs and sugar is likely to backfire and leave you feeling worse? How to use your body as a guide to determine the best nutrition plan for your PCOS management. The most important thing you should focus on first when managing your symptoms beyond food. And we're going to end by talking about some simple goals, simple, actionable, realistic things that you can focus on this week to help managing your PCOS symptoms. I'm so excited about today's episode. Now let's jump in with our guest, Stepanie Hill.
I am so happy to be here. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So I'm ready to dive into it.
I'm sure, especially if you have, when it comes to intuitive eating and food freedom, a lot of people will specialize in different niches. And I actually just had an amazing conversation with someone who specializes more in the sports and fitness world and how to incorporate that together. But I would love to talk about PCOS because I do have a lot of clients who have come to me with autoimmune diseases, with PCOS, and some people, when it comes to intuitive eating and merging the practice of intuitive eating with medical conditions, with food-related medical conditions, it can feel very confusing and counterintuitive. And so why don't we start by talking about, for anyone who doesn't really know, what PCOS is?
Yeah, absolutely. So PCOS, or polycystic ovary syndrome, is an endocrine disorder, and many times I think it's portrayed as just a reproductive disorder because it has the word ovary in it, but really because it's an endocrine disorder, it's really a syndrome that has metabolic consequences and physiologic consequences as well as reproductive effects. So something I think is important to acknowledge when talking about PCOS, if this is reaching anyone that maybe is newly diagnosed or just learning about it, that you did not cause your PCOS. There are a lot of genetic factors when it comes to PCOS, and a lot of people just haven't received proper guidance with it. So often I hear clients get diagnosed by their doctor, and then they're given the option of birth control and just told to come back if they want to have children eventually down the line. Mm-hmm. And the truth of the matter is there's so many lifestyle and nutrition ways that you can support yourself and support your PCOS management in a non-diet way. And that's kind of where intuitive eating comes into play. So with PCOS, there's sort of 3 areas that can be used to diagnose. And these 3 areas are kind of where you focus the nutrition interventions and kind of focusing in on sort of the drivers behind PCOS. And so the 4 drivers for PCOS are stress, especially stress around food. And we know that stress around food can feel like so much stress. And I think anyone who is interested in this intuitive eating space can probably relate to that. And that when you have food rules and food obsessions because of restriction, it causes a lot of stress in your life. Mm-hmm. And another driver would be gut health and insulin resistance, and then inflammation. And so with those 4 drivers of PCOS, that's really kind of where the nutrition with intuitive eating kind of merges in with the kind of physiological causes and impacts of PCOS.
Okay. So as you were saying before, so at what age do most people get diagnosed with PCOS?
I've seen as early as like 12 when maybe some women are first getting their period. So the diagnostic criteria for PCOS, it has like three sort of parameters, and you have to meet two out of the three to be diagnosed. So one of them is missed or irregular periods having less than 8 cycles per year. And so sometimes that's usually the trigger for someone thinking like, something's up. Maybe I haven't had my period for like 4 months. What's going on? And they usually go see their like PCP or a gynecologist, and that sort of leads down to the diagnosis. But other women may actually have normal periods, and they start to notice these symptoms that arise later in life, like maybe excessive hair growth on the face, or acne, or like just feeling fatigued all the time. And those symptoms are based on one of the other diagnostic criteria, which is having increased androgens, which is the male sex hormones. And so that sort of is another way that leads people into maybe finding out that they have PCOS. They bring themselves into the doctor's office and they're diagnosed. And so that usually I see maybe like in their early 20s.
Okay.
And then the third way is if they have multiple follicles on their ovaries, and that's seen in an ultrasound. So normally that's kind of like following up on some other symptoms that you've had. And usually I see those people like that have had an ultrasound. That's usually in their like early 20s as well.
Okay. And someone who gets diagnosed with PCOS, what does that mean for them? For their quality of life, some of the things that they're going to have to live with, the way that maybe lifestyle changes that they're going to have to make. I mean, it can feel a lot of the times when we get a diagnosis like that, it can feel heavy. It can feel like, oh my God, the rest of my life is going to be different. So what does that diagnostic mean?
Yeah. So unfortunately with PCOS, and not to say that this isn't the only condition that people experience this with, but they're given almost no guidance when they go and get a diagnosis from their doctor. And so oftentimes they either leave the doctor's office more confused than when they walked in, or they try and do some research for themselves. And then they get even more confused because I'm sure you can relate to, there's so much misinformation about nutrition out there that they kind of feel like paralyzed and they don't know where to start. And so many of my clients who I am first starting with, and I ask them like what their PCOS story is, it usually centers around feeling a lot of feelings of being overwhelmed, lost, feeling like, some of the symptoms that I was discussing, that they're destined to have this. For example, like insulin resistance is common in women with PCOS. I think it's like 70%, but not every woman with PCOS will experience insulin resistance. And so there's a lot of fear that these women have when they're first given a diagnosis, because, they'll hear insulin resistance and then they're scared they're going to develop diabetes later in life, and they feel like out of control. And so that's where my job is to educate them, and that, every person's experience with PCOS is different. You may not have insulin resistance, so let's get some labs. Let's, work together to see what's really going on, and then giving them the tools and information where they feel like they're making informed decisions for themselves again, because a lot of times they weren't even given the option for that. They were usually just handed medication.
Okay. So is that what most people experience when it comes to they get diagnosed with PCOS, they get put on medication, or maybe they get given some bad advice about lifestyle changes that they need to make and nutrition changes that they need to make? Like, what are some of the, I would say, like the biggest mistakes that people make?
Yeah. And so, I have people that come on medication, and the reality behind medication is that it's there to make your symptoms manageable. And so if that's making them manageable for you, by all means, take the medication. I want you to be able to live your life in a manageable way. But the medication isn't getting to like the root cause of the PCOS. And so relying solely on, say, like birth control, there may be at one point in your life where you want to come off birth control if you want to have a family. And so having the tools to manage your PCOS in a way where you're, off contraceptives and you're able to make those choices for family planning. But also some of the diet advice, the small diet advice that does come from doctors is don't eat sugar, eat less carbs, and lose weight. And I'm sure we hear this with other like conditions and stuff too. And it's so damaging because women with PCOS are more likely to have disordered eating or eating disorders because weight gain is part of the symptoms they may experience. And of course, we live in a society where that's stigmatized. And so they try and reduce their calories and lose weight. And it might feel like a losing battle to them. And then their doctor is like, well, just lose weight. And, it's so disheartening to get that advice. So I think it shows a lot of like courage for them to try and seek out advice from other areas, because so much of what is given to them initially is, just eat less sugar, don't eat carbs, which is not true.
So why don't you tell me why that advice of eat less sugar, eat less carbs. I've also had people come to me with PCOS said, eat less dairy too. Maybe you hear a little bit of everything, a little sprinkled diet culture everywhere. Why is that bad advice? Because I'm sure that anyone who's listening to this might be thinking, of course, like eating less sugar is going to be good for me. So how could that possibly backfire on me? So why is that bad advice?
Right. So sort of circling back to women with PCOS being more likely to have disordered eating tendencies, and really just everyone in general, we know that restriction is one of the main causes for binging. And when we restrict something, it only makes us want it more, and it makes us feel more out of control around food. So I would never recommend anyone cutting out something completely from their diet unless they're allergic to it or have like an actual intolerance. And so it's just more damaging to their relationship with food, which is going to be more dangerous than like any amount of sugar that they are trying to consume in their life at the moment.
Yeah.
And then, as far as the dairy goes, the problem is there's not a whole lot of research in the PCOS population because women's health is so under-researched. And so with the dairy, it's really kind of a case-by-case basis with whether or not there is an impact of dairy. And usually it's referring to acne. And so there have been a few studies that show correlation between acne and dairy, but this is in the general population, not PCOS specifically. And so, when the like kind of BuzzFeed words come up of like avoid dairy and then avoid gluten is another one for PCOS, it may not be necessary. And so restricting it when you don't even like, it doesn't even affect your body can be damaging to your relationship with food, and also very hard to like enjoy foods in a regular way if you're eating out to dinner or like going to dinner with family. So like just removing it without either guidance from like a dietitian or a healthcare practitioner that's like teaching you how to tune in to whether or not dairy is actually affecting you, it is so damaging. So I don't like to see it as a general recommendation.
Yeah. And I think that's so important to say. I was talking about this with another guest, and when I was struggling with my relationship with food, I used to follow all of these crazy diets, and I actually convinced myself that I was intolerant to gluten, because I was having all these gut issues, which obviously in retrospect, I look back on it, it's because I was not eating enough and I was over exercising and I was stressed all the time. And of course I was having gut issues, but I really convinced myself that I was intolerant to gluten. I also went on all of these different diets. Like, I went on paleo and these things that told me that I shouldn't eat beans and I shouldn't eat oats. And there was all of these toxins and all of these different foods and then I shouldn't eat them. And I remember after a while just pausing and thinking, this doesn't make sense to me. Like this doesn't intuitively make sense. It doesn't feel right. Like I feel good when I eat beans. I feel good when I eat oats. It's part of my breakfast every morning. And so it's so important that we are critical about the information that we take in, because a piece of advice which might be really great for someone could have nothing to do with your body. And 10 people could eat exactly the same and have completely different reactions. And so it's so important to be critical of those pieces of information and say, okay, maybe this has helped 8 out of 10 people. But if I'm not having this kind of reaction, if my body's not feeling this certain type of way, and like you said, it's important to work with someone as you're going through this, because if you're someone who doesn't know how to listen to your body, who doesn't know how your body responds to different foods, it's really important to have something that makes sense for you personally.
Right. And trying to listen to all of the different recommendations of the different food groups you should avoid, like there's nothing left if you follow what's all out there. It's paralyzing. So
yes,
working with someone that can make a specific recommendation where you don't have to go through the 30 different, I mean, to be honest, maybe you don't need to figure out if you're intolerant to anything. Maybe you're okay. And maybe the internet is convincing you that actually your body hates gluten, which very well you could be okay with. So
how, if someone were to work with someone and they do it on their own, and they find out that certain foods don't make them feel so good, or that they are intolerant or whatever it is, they find something out about possible restrictions, how do you implement and practice intuitive eating when there are actual foods that maybe you should limit or that you should cut back on because of the way that your body responds to that? How do you do that without falling back into that really harmful, restrictive mindset that can lead to resistance and rebellion and then overeating as a result?
Yeah, absolutely. So with, I would say the majority of things regarding intuitive eating, everything comes down to the intention behind it. And so, if you're working with someone and you're working on your food freedom journey and you're able to start identifying what your thought process is in these moments, and you're able to identify what your intention behind these, maybe like food restrictions or not having dairy in your diet, for example, if that's coming from a place of, nurture or care for your body, like I physically don't feel good after having this. It's not because the internet says that dairy is going to cause inflammation and dairy is bad and
someone else is telling me that I should be eating a certain way. Yeah.
Because, that's an external cue, and intuitive eating is all about internal cues. So if you're able to acknowledge that your body is telling you something, that's intuitive eating. Like intuitive eating doesn't mean saying yes to all foods all the time. It's about, tuning into what feels good for you physically, mentally, and emotionally. And so, sometimes I'll work with someone who is considering whether or not dairy is a trigger for them. And every time we check in with each other, I ask, like, how are you feeling with this? Like mentally, is this like feeling like a trigger for you? Is it feeling like a restriction? Because ultimately, like, your relationship with food is going to be my number one priority, because any work after that and you don't have a good relationship with food is not going to be as productive.
Yeah. And I think it's so true. And we were talking about that on a different interview. It always comes down to intention, because if you feel like you're doing something, this also comes down to like intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. If you feel like you're doing something because, and it comes from a place of guilt, or it comes from a place of shame, or it comes from a place of following what someone else is telling you to do, then your independence and your autonomy gets robbed from you. And as humans, we're always trying to get our independence back. And so we are bound to fall into that resistance and that rebellion of, you know what? Someone else told me I can't eat dairy, so screw that. I'm going to eat dairy, and I'm going to eat even more, and my body's going to feel like crap. And so I totally agree with you. I personally just don't do well with fried food. My body does not agree with it. And I know that if someone had come to me and said, Sabrina, you're not allowed to eat fried food. It's not good for you. It's going to make you gain weight. Then of course, my first reaction when I go out and someone orders a fried calamari is, I'm going to have this food. And now I get to make that decision from personal choice. I know that this food doesn't make me feel great. I know I can make the decision to have this food and then probably have a stomach ache for the rest of the night. Or I can make a decision from a place of self-care and that I would rather just enjoy the rest of my night and maybe eat something else. And there's going to be times maybe I really want that calamari. And I ask myself, if I don't have this food, am I going to be thinking about it for the next month, for the next week until I eventually like cave and I go get fries and everything that can possibly be fried and then have everything in abundance? And then if that decision is, okay, I actually do want to have a little bit now, then I'm doing it from a place of personal choice instead of someone else dictating how I should be eating.
Exactly. And I said this actually this morning, that like I can give you all the information about PCOS and I can try and give you all the knowledge to feel like you're making informed decisions, but the best knowledge is your like learned experience, because that is coming from an intrinsic point. That means you're tuning into your body and you're able to start listening and learning. And so if someone is able to get to that point where they know that the intention behind it is that it doesn't make me feel physically pleasant, and right now that is not a choice that I want to make. Like, that is when they're really starting to make like progress in the relationship with food.
Yeah. And we know this from the science of behavior change. If someone doesn't feel like the idea comes from them, if they feel like someone else is telling you to stop smoking, someone else is telling you that you need to work out every morning, and it's not coming from your genuine desire to do that, you're a lot less likely to follow through or to at least be consistent with it. And so it comes back to that same thing with food. When you're able to look inwards and make that decision for yourself of what feels good or not. And I'm sure that you hear this, because I hear this all the time, is just tell me what to eat and what not to eat. And that's actually not productive. You've been told your entire life what to eat and what not to eat. And all that's done is make eating feel like a chore. It's made eating feel confusing, feel stressful, feel overwhelming. That's not going to help you make consistent balance and good choices for yourself.
Right. And then when I, like with that question, like, just tell me what to eat. You know, I flip the question on them, like, well, what do you want to eat? And they're almost like taken back. Like, well, what do you mean? That's not how I make food decisions.
Yes.
And so, you know, the beginning part is like really scary to kind of walk into the area of no rules. And like, you know, I still give guidance, but like, they're the drivers. I heard an analogy, like, you know, I'm like with the guardrails to give you some guidance, but like you're the driver and you're going to decide where this goes.
Yeah, 100%. And so if someone needs to start becoming aware of how different foods react and how they feel, and you're helping them guide through that, where do they start? What does that look like for them?
Yeah. So typically I would say we give like 30 days or so to see if, you know, removing the food, we kind of walk through like maybe hidden forms of the food. Because if we're like trying to eliminate dairy, we want to make sure that we're actually eliminating dairy to make sure like it's like a true experiment. So we kind of walk through, you know, especially gluten, like if we're trying to rule out like a gluten sensitivity, gluten can hide in a lot of things. So there's some education behind it, but then, you know, we walk through some of the symptoms of, that they were experienced before. And, you know, with dairy, it's the acne is like a pretty, visual thing. And that can be easy to kind of determine, but some of the like GI issues, like sometimes it can be hard to determine like what's an impact of GI conditions or GI disorders. And so we kind of walk through what those could feel like. And then, you know, we just kind of check in. I usually see people like once every 2 weeks. So we check in and see how they're feeling. And then if after 30 days, like their symptoms haven't changed, we're going to introduce that food again, because you're likely like okay with that food, and your symptoms are maybe coming from something else. And so, um, you know, I always encourage people, like if they're having like really bad GI issues, like go see like a gastroenterologist, and like we're going to build our team from here. But
Yeah.
if it's, like bloating and stuff like that, let's see if it's a trigger, and we'll check back in. And if we don't think it's a trigger, then we're going to find a new solution, and we're going to add that food back in.
Okay. So let's say you've done the testing and the nutrition, you've done everything that you can, you've removed, you've added back in. Does it ever happen where there's literally nothing that's going on with their nutrition that is affecting their PCOS, and we have to look at it like completely different aspect of their lifestyle?
Oh, yes. So like PCOS management, there's like anti-inflammatory foods that you can add in, and we want balanced blood sugar, so we're adding in like protein and stuff at our meals. But that some of the drivers of PCOS that I mentioned previously, stress and inflammation, sleep is a huge contributor to like stress management, and also inflammation. It's like the time for our body to reset. And women with PCOS actually have a difficulty time having quality sleep. And, that's due to some of the pathophysiology parts of the syndrome. And so working on sleep hygiene is big, like making your room cool before you go to sleep, trying to reduce your screen time at night, having like a nighttime routine. So there's definitely parts of sleep habits that plays into PCOS. And then of course, movement. And depending on where these women are at in their relationship with exercise is whether or not we kind of make that a goal. If they're, still kind of using exercise as a form of like restriction or trying to compensate for things, usually we're going to try and take exercise off the table for now, because right now it's not a health promoting habit. But
Okay.
if we're able to do it like in a healthy way, then exercise can be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm right there with you. I start looking at exercise. Well, it's obviously individual to each client, but let's first look at the foundation of what your relationship with food and your body is. And if we incorporate exercise too early on, then we're actually just fueling this fire. And we want to make sure that we're doing that very carefully at the right time. But what I'm hearing is, most people, when they hear that they have PCOS, I'm assuming that their first reaction is go on a diet and lose weight. And from what I'm hearing is people kind of underestimate the power of, no one probably thinks, okay, I have PCOS, I have to focus on my sleep. I have to focus on my stress release. And sleep is kind of like this anchor that's associated to your stress, to your inflammation. And so if you can at least start with getting better quality sleep, you're going to be less stressed. And we know, I think I should do a full episode on the power of sleep, but like we know that when you are sleep deprived or you're not getting enough sleep, you're more vulnerable to stress. You are going to be more inflamed, and it's going to affect your eating habits in the long run as well. It's going to affect your hormones. And so if you can look at that, if you've been diagnosed with PCOS or if you're struggling with that and you're able to notice that sleep is a part of your life that maybe you've been neglecting, it's it's an easy place to start, because there's so many small habits that you can implement that don't take a lot of time, that don't take a lot of effort, that don't take a lot of money, that don't take a lot of guidance, that you can implement to have a morning routine or a nighttime routine and enhance your sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. And, they all kind of like start to work in with each other, like all of these PCOS drivers, like if we're improving our sleep and we're bringing our stress level down, that brings down inflammation. And then we know like decreased inflammation also helps with our gut health. And then decreased inflammation can also help with insulin resistance. And so like once, we kind of get one area under control, it starts to maybe like snowball into other areas, and you can feel like less tired throughout the day. And it's just really powerful to start seeing women like take kind of back control over their bodies and feel empowered because of these health promoting habits that have nothing to do with weight loss. They can feel the difference. It's really, really amazing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's say someone has bad sleep hygiene or they don't get good quality sleep. I'm such a big fan of having a morning routine, having a nighttime routine. And when you hear morning routine, you probably think someone who wakes up and meditates and journals and goes for a walk and, all of these different things, which it doesn't have to be that way. But if someone wants to start having better sleep hygiene, what are like three to five action steps that they can take?
Okay. Number one, put your phone away for like an hour before bedtime. I know it can be difficult, but try and pick up a book. Reading can help sleep, but just something that we're not seeing that harsh light so much. Secondly, keeping the room cool. I believe it's like 68 degrees is kind of what they recommend, but it's personal preference. But even just that small thing can impact your sleep, even if like it doesn't really seem that big of a deal. It might be easier in the winter to keep it around 68 in your house. And then, just starting to create a habit out of it, because the more you do it, the more your body is kind of tuning into, okay, it's bedtime. Like this is, it's really like a routine. And just like any other routine in your life, it kind of becomes a force of habit, and maybe it just comes easier. So I think just trying to, make an intention behind doing it as regularly as you can really make a big impact.
hmm And I want to, when you talk about putting that phone away for an hour before bed, I know my audience very well. And I know we've got a lot of all or nothing thinkers over here who think if I can't put my phone away at least an hour before bed, then I'm not even gonna bother. And so I would say if anyone's listening, and right now you're the kind of person who's literally rolled on their left side, looking at their phone, scrolling until you go to bed and you charge it on your bedside table, start small. Let's say you can start with I'm going to start with 15 minutes before and I'm just going to have that 15-minute break before I go to bed. Maybe I'll read a book. Maybe I'll talk to my partner. Maybe I'll meditate, whatever, journal, whatever it is. And then start small until you can be consistent with it. If you're noticing that, okay, I was able to do 15 minutes, next week, let's try 30 minutes until you can be consistent with it, and then build on that. Because I know that if you're trying to go from you're on your bed, you're on your phone, you're glued to your phone until you go to bed to an hour before bed, that can seem not fun and it can seem very overwhelming. So start small and start with something that seems doable for you and that you can be consistent with.
Absolutely. You don't need to go cold turkey. Like any
Yeah.
bit of time is progress.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so as we're ending this, I know that I saw a post on Instagram that you posted, and I was like, I think that this could be really helpful. You wrote PCOS goals for the week. So someone who wants to know, okay, we talked about sleep, having that good sleep hygiene. What are some things that people can focus on that are very manageable, that are simple, that are not overcomplicated, that don't say, cut out carbs as of Monday? What are some things that people can set as goals for the week to start feeling better?
Yeah, absolutely. So the goals that I posted, they were all small little tidbits, because
hmm
kind of like we just said, like starting small is the way to ultimately make progress, because if we set these big looming goals, they can seem overwhelming. So I would say, if you're really just trying to start your PCOS management journey and you're feeling lost, I would say make sure you're eating enough. So I would say 90% of the time I see clients, and they've been told to restrict their whole lives, and it's probably some of the weight stigma that they've experienced, or maybe disordered eating tendencies where they are not eating enough to support their body. And blood sugar management is so important for PCOS. And if we're not eating enough, we're not having good blood sugar control. We're probably hitting crashes throughout the day. And so this will look differently for everyone. But as a rule of thumb, 3 meals a day and snacks in between is usually a beneficial practice for people. And so I would challenge you, if you're not having breakfast in the morning, start with something small, like grab a little, like a packet of oatmeal with a protein bar or fruit or something, just something to start building that
Banana,
habit.
peanut butter,
Yeah,
yogurt. Yeah.
just something to start building that habit where you're starting to nourish your body consistently. Because I think nutrition adequacy and having enough like energy, calories is like step number one. We can't talk about like phytochemicals and antioxidants and stuff if you're not eating enough. So I think if you're not eating consistently, try and do your best to bring in that missing meal in your day. And I think this could be helpful to anyone right now with the daylight savings just started. So like the sun setting is on my mind. Try and get outside for 10 minutes. Get some vitamin D. It's good for your mood. It's good for your mental health. It's good for just getting some fresh air.
It's so funny that you're saying that, because so right now it's 3:49. I was actually just thinking, the sun's about to go down soon. I should go for my last walk of the day before. So I love going for walks. And I think that's so important. And especially if you can do it as early on in the morning, that's going to help you with your sleep. And we're tying everything up. If you're able to expose your eyes to sunlight, like first thing in the morning, within the first hour, even if it's just 10 minutes, and not through glasses, not through a window, like actually going outside and looking outside and exposing yourself to the sunlight, not only is it going to improve your mood, but it's also going to help your circadian rhythm, which is going to help with your sleep. And so all of these different things are going to, and it's going to make you feel good. You're going to be happy. You're going to get some movement, go for a walk. There's so many benefits that you can get from just 10 minutes. And think, if you're someone who scrolls on your phone for 10 minutes in the morning, you've got that time. You've got that time to go and take care of yourself. So start with something small. I love that. I think that's like a very, high impact habit that is it's going to start your day off well. It's going to give you so many different benefits. It's not going to take a lot of time to do.
Yes, I love that. Like, do something for you before you start the rest of your day. I say that all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're listening right now, put it into your schedule, like put it into your calendar, because if it's not scheduled, you're not going to do it. Or tell someone that is going to be your goal for the week, whatever it is, whether it's eating consistently or creating a bedtime routine or walking in the morning. Set it as a goal, write it down, share it with someone, put it into your calendar, because when it's just floating around in your head, it's just an idea that we think it's a great idea. We walk away and then we never implement it. So implement it, find a way to make it part of your day, and then just stay consistent with it. Thank you so much, Steph. I could talk to you for so much longer about PCOS. I think it's so interesting, but where could people find you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram at Steph_the_dietitian, Steph the dietitian. And then on our website, I work under a practice, and our website is KathleenRileyNutrition.com. And you can read more about our services there and kind of what we're all about.
Amazing. And last question, if someone is at their very beginning of their journey they've just been diagnosed with PCOS, or maybe they feel very, very lost, they don't know where to start, and you could talk to that person who just wants, like, if you could say one thing to that person, one piece of advice, one piece of wisdom that would be really helpful, what would that be for them?
That you are not alone, and that there's support for you in ways that don't include shrinking your body. 1 in 7 women have PCOS in the United States. So just because healthcare doesn't really seem to put so much emphasis on women's health or PCOS, there are people here for you, and there's support out there.
Okay. Amazing. You're not unfixable, right? You're not broken, and there is so much that you can do, and you can take your power back to start feeling better and getting better.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Steph. I really appreciate your time, and thank you all for listening to today's episode, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magna Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.